And using a continuous glucose monitor and months of tracking my data, I was able to determine, even with higher amounts of calories, I ate slightly higher amount of calories over the last couple of weeks when I was evaluating the glucose lowering formula, and I had my best glucose numbers yet.
It's such an interesting, because you're intersecting with, I would say, kind of three interesting environments just from a research perspective. There's kind of like, what qualifies as kind of, doctorate level work in a very controlled environment. Then you have kind of these military and space explorations where I would say that the risk parameters are significantly higher than what you might go into the lab. And so they're, obviously I remember you were talking about if you had too much oxygen this is one of the kind of the ketone benefits of being on a ketogenic diet would extend how people could perform without having seizure and underwater operations for like Navy SEALs and things like that, like with their oxygen content, which obviously Navy SEALs aren't hanging out at the lab in a research facility. They're dealing with kind of covert, very high risk issues. And then you have the ordinary guy or gal here that's listening to the podcast and saying, I want to try a continuous blood sugar monitor to see how these, how rice affects me versus donuts or whatever. How do you determine, like, going through that process in your own self-experimentation, are there some parameters that you set just when you're doing your own experiments that maybe our listeners can kind of incorporate if they're doing their own experiments?
Well, if I'm testing, for example, I'm wearing a continuous glucose monitor, sensors on the back of my arm.
What one do you like, by the way? Which ones do you feel are the best?
Well, right now I'm using the Freestyle Libre that shows up. But Levels Health app, which is really the premier sort of technology for evaluating CGM data, the Levels app currently works with the Libre and will soon work, I believe, just next month with the Dexcom device.
Okay.
So, and then on the horizon, I'm sure many other devices. When I first started using the CGM, I just wanted to figure out, what my everyday diet was doing, right? So I didn't change anything, and I wasn't experimenting with anything per se. So I just wanted to keep everything exactly, how I have been eating and the macronutrient ratios and even the types of foods. And then once I established like a baseline, then I start evaluating different supplements to determine how my baseline changes. And for me, it was a low carb diet on some days and a ketogenic diet, which is really lower in carbs on other days. And occasionally I would do intermittent fasting. So it gives me an opportunity to evaluate supplements. And, for example, I'm evaluating the BiOptimizers secret formula. It's not out yet, but I'm on formula number 2, and using a continuous glucose monitor and months of tracking my data, I was able to determine, even with higher amounts of calories, I ate slightly higher amount of calories over the last couple of weeks when I was evaluating the glucose lowering formula, and I had my best glucose numbers yet.
Wow,
so
that's great.
That it's a combination of understanding the types of foods that will affect postprandial glucose excursions, but my foods have pretty much stayed the same. I try to keep everything the same. So it gives me a lot of insight into how fasting, how stress, how different types of foods, even with the same macronutrient ratio or meals, can affect your glucose levels. And your glucose level will really dictate kind of your energy flow throughout the day. And for me, if I can stay in a state of mild ketosis, and typically in the 1 millimolar range, and sometimes later in the day, like right now is a day that I'm intermittent fasting and I'm around 2. On the breath ketone meter, I'm about 20 ACEs, which correlates very nicely with blood ketones, which is about 2 millimolar. And that's when I kind of feel a good state of flow. And, so I like to evaluate different things under different scenarios. And the CGM is also extremely useful to evaluate the different types of low carb ketogenic foods that are entering the market. So that's maybe where it has been extremely valuable. Because I tend to test a lot of foods, and I can refer the foods to various organizations like the Charlie Foundation or Matthew's Friends. Even we work closely with Max Love Project, which is, they're all focused on dietary therapies for managing seizures or brain cancer. And it gives me an opportunity to figure out what foods are truly ketogenic or truly low carb. And then, we can highlight them on our website and actually do a review of the food. So these technologies that have emerged and they didn't exist 5 to 10 years ago when I started doing this research. So the technologies didn't exist, like the breath ketone meters. There's different blood monitoring devices like the Keto Mojo. I like to take a blood measurement and put it on all the different devices to determine how each one performs relative to the other one, and how the blood correlates with breath. And I have that data combined with my continuous glucose monitor, and I can determine also, I wear a Fitbit or an Oura Ring, and I could determine how my metabolism and meals and meal timing affect my sleep. So sleep is a huge variable. Probably, if you can optimize your sleep, that's probably one of the most potent ergogenic aids out there for enhancing your performance, right? So, and it's very, over the last couple of years, it just has not been recognized as much. Matthew Walker has brought a lot of attention to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so these technologies have really helped, me advance my understanding, and then I can take this information and have some really important questions and testable hypotheses for larger scale clinical trials.